do grains qualify as a whole food?
Well, certainly the form in which they are most frequently consumed today, absolutely not.
Right.
Most people today, the form of grains which most people consume are refined grains.
Muffins.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Health cake.
And even if you were to go to Google Images and look at the image of the food pyramid, which thankfully has been retired, what it's been replaced by is, I would say not that much better.
Yeah.
Although it is an improvement. But I mean, it was literally the illustrated USDA food pyramid. It was like pasta. It was like loaves of bread.
Yeah.
Like you're telling me that that's essential for good health, that I need to be eating 7 to 11 servings of this
at least
on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you actually look at what a grain is, I mean, most grains today actually in the supermarket are fortified because they're so nutrient impoverished that they have to have added nutrients added to them to make
even
them
in their basic form
serve any sort of dietary value at all. But they're essentially pure. It's essentially pure energy. It's cattle feed. Now, I'm not saying that grains can't play a supportive role to health. I mean, certainly you look at, for example, bodybuilders who are in fantastic physical shape. It's not they do. Many of them on social media, the more prominent ones, do use performance-enhancing drugs. But I mean, grains can be used to facilitate exercise performance and the like. And I think
you can say too, like socially speaking, the first order problem that our society had to contend with was getting everyone enough calories.
Yeah.
Right. And you could see some utility in generating cheap calories. I often think about corn syrup in that regard. Corn syrup is a very cheap source of calories. But when the problem is obesity and not starvation, corn syrup seems like a very bad solution.
Correct.
And so, I'm willing to give the Department of Agriculture, let's say, its credit for assuming that, or for ensuring that calories per se are in plentiful supply, which is the case. But man, we're paying a vicious price for it on the other side of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we live amidst the first time in human history where there are more overweight people walking the earth than underweight.
Right.
And so we've solved the food scarcity problem. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody in a state of energy deficit today in the Western world.
Yeah.
Especially
and
here
increasingly in the developed world, except when that's used for political, like most of the starvation in particular in the developed world is purposeful, not the consequence of economic inadequacy, right?
Yeah.
It's targeted. And so, and that's a good thing that we solved that problem. But these problems are not trivial either.
Yeah.
And they're getting worse.
Correct. And I'm not saying that grains cause, Alzheimer's disease. That's never been my stance. But, we do have to look at this as a food quality problem. And grains, I don't believe are, particularly when you have all these other options in the supermarket, like grass-fed, grass-finished beef, wild fatty fish, salmon, for example, sardines, eggs. Eggs are one of nature's cognitive multivitamins. A study was just published that found that, just consuming...
And they were demonized too.
They were demonized too, yeah.
You bet.
And interestingly, and this is, again, and to preface, I'll never, just to reiterate, I'll never know what caused my mom's dementia. I don't know if it had anything to do with nutrition. It could have had everything to do with it. I don't know. I'll never know. But, my mom was somebody who, for the entirety of her life, was concerned about heart disease. And so whatever the messaging was around heart disease is something that my mom adopted and ingrained essentially in not just her diet, but my diet growing up. And so, my kitchen was always filled with, low-fat, fat-free, cholesterol-free, food-like products that adorned by the red Heart Healthy logo on them, which you still see ubiquitously in the supermarket, right? And eggs were one of those foods that we threw out, essentially, in lieu of these more, processed, high-margin replacement products. And an egg is literally a cognitive multivitamin. I mean, it contains a little bit of everything required to grow a brain, right? So it's postmarked by nature. This is what you need to grow a brain in an egg yolk, right?
Even if it's a chicken brain.
Even if it's a chicken brain. Yeah, but studies are now starting to show that they're an incredible cognitive multivitamin. A study was just published that found that, all it takes is 1 to 2 eggs a week in this one study. And there was something like a 50% risk, close to a 50% risk reduction for the development of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
We know that choline is one of the most important nutrients. In fact, about 40% of the effect that they saw in this observational trial, they thought was attributed to the fact that egg yolks are the top source of choline in the standard American diet. And yet 90% of adults today don't consume the adequate intake for choline on a daily basis. And choline
Right,
is
so that's the consequence of demonizing eggs.
There you go. You
Great.
demonize eggs.
Great.
90% of adults don't consume adequate choline, which is crucially important. It's the backbone to acetylcholine, which is the neurotransmitter involved in learning and memory, right? It forms the, skeleton molecule of our neuronal membranes, which are crucially important for our, brain cell communication, our ability to perceive the world. So it's a fantastic food. And, I remember when my mom first served me, that egg, my first egg, she was like, she warned me not to consume them with any, significant frequency because they might clog my arteries.
Right.
And we know that dietary cholesterol.
Mm-hmm. Well, the data was there
a
long time ago showing that this, I knew this in like the 1980s, the decreased risk of heart disease reported as a consequence of cholesterol lowering was swamped by the increase in suicide that was caused by the fact that cholesterol is a precursor to serotonin. So even if fewer people died of heart attacks, which is probably not true anyways, more people committed suicide. So that's part of the problem with the complexity of dietary studies, right? Is you need to control for a lot of variables and you need to measure a lot of outcomes.
Yeah, but with these observational studies, there's always residual confounding.
Yes, always. There's no way of controlling it.
There's no way.
No. You can't do correlational dietary studies.
Yeah, you just can't.
No. They should never be published.
Yeah, I'm pro plants. That's a flag that that I've planted, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But it's not hard to imagine a world where, all of the mountains of evidence that we have observationally looking at, how fruits and vegetables impact human health, the positive effects that we see at the epidemiologic, scale, that could potentially be a false positive because everybody and their mother knows that fruits and vegetables are good for you, right? And eating fresh fruits and vegetables today is an incredible privilege in a time when, 60% of the calories come from these ultra-processed foods. It can be really difficult to find access to fresh fruits and vegetables, right? We do have RCT data showing us that there are beneficial compounds. I've talked about some of the phytochemicals in it. But conversely, red meat, it's also very easy.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that a bit because I was obviously at some point we're going to get into the issue of the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
And so I guess the first thing I'd say is, and you're making some allusion to it now, obviously, what are your thoughts about the carnivore diet and its potential advantages and dangers?
I think it's potentially a great therapeutic diet for people that have, a predisposition to autoimmunity.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not something that I would ever behold anybody. Here's the other thing is that diet zealots, particularly today on social media, they seem to be very emotionally invested in what other people eat. Mm-hmm. I don't care ultimately what other people eat.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that.
Yeah.
At say a moral level,
right? But
emotional,
you want people to be able to make informed decisions, not decisions clouded by what I call covert activism, right?
And, or overt activism for that matter.
Yeah, or misinformation or disinformation about what it means to eat healthily today. Ultimately, I don't care. If somebody wants to,
otherwise known as lies.
Yes, precisely. So yeah, I would, for people that have seen a reprieve of symptoms from some of these awful conditions that people suffer from.
Yeah,
keep doing it.
Yeah,
I think that for somebody with a robust gut microbiome, who I think people should be able to tolerate, and not just tolerate, but to derive a health benefit from, many of these so-called plant defense compounds, even cruciferous vegetables, which have become demonized in certain carnivore circles, due to, certain glucosinolate compounds or compound like sulforaphane, which, there are actual randomized human trials that show that these compounds can actually help us detoxify from some of these environmental pollutants that we know, play a role in disease. Obviously, you can get a certain dose, if you will, of phytochemicals from eating animal source foods, but carotenoids like lutein and zeaxanthin, which we know are very beneficial to brain health, you're not going to find a better source of them in the supermarket than kale, for example, which people love to hate on. But foods like kale, spinach, dark leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, I think that I do think that for most people, the benefits outweigh the risks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.